Michelle Parker was at her wit's end. Sitting in the cramped, dimly lit office of her father's old shop, she stared at the overdue bills spread across her desk. She had done everything she could think of: cut down expenses, put in extra hours, even hosted community events to try to boost sales. But nothing seemed to work. The shop had been in her family for generations, originally opened by her grandfather and later run by her father. It had been her father's pride and joy, a cornerstone of the small community they lived in. Now, with him gone, Michelle had taken over, determined to keep his legacy alive. But it was proving to be a losing battle. Her hands trembled as she picked up the letter from the bank. The loan she had applied for to keep the business afloat had been rejected. Without additional security, namely a co-signer or spouse, she had no way to get the funds she desperately needed. Michelle's heart sank. She was alone, with no one to turn to for help. Later that day, she met up with her best friend, Jessica, at a cozy local coffee shop. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but Michelle barely noticed as she poured out her frustrations. "I just don't know what to do anymore," she said, running a hand through her dark hair. "They won't give me the loan unless I have a husband or a co-signer. I mean, really? How old-fashioned is that?" Jessica frowned, her brow furrowed in concern. "That's ridiculous. But what can you do? There has to be another way." Michelle sighed, staring at her untouched cup of coffee. "I've tried everything. Without that loan, I'll lose the shop. It's the last thing I have of my dad's." Unbeknownst to them, someone was listening. A man sitting a few tables away had been quietly reading a book, but his attention had shifted to the women's conversation. His name was Jack Dawson, and though Michelle had no way of knowing, he was no ordinary man. Jack was the CEO of Dawson Enterprises, a multimillion-dollar corporation with vast business holdings. But to the world outside of the corporate boardrooms, Jack preferred to keep a low profile. He dressed simply, in worn jeans and a plain shirt, and spent most of his free time away from the spotlight. Jack valued authenticity and had long since grown tired of people trying to befriend him or get close to him because of his wealth. Intrigued by Michelle's story, Jack listened a little longer before making a decision. He stood up and walked over to their table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice soft but confident. Michelle looked up, surprised to see a tall, good-looking man standing before her. His sandy blonde hair fell casually across his forehead, and his warm hazel eyes were full of kindness. "I couldn't help but overhear. It sounds like you're in a tough spot." Michelle blushed slightly, embarrassed that a stranger had overheard her venting. "Yeah, you could say that, but it's nothing I can't handle." She tried to sound confident, though deep down, she was anything but. "I'm sure you can," Jack said, flashing her a reassuring smile. "But if you need a hand, I'd be happy to help." Michelle frowned in confusion. "What do you mean?" Jack hesitated for a moment, then sat down. "I know this might sound strange, but I overheard you saying you need a co-signer, or well, a husband, to get that loan. If you want, I could offer to help. We could marry temporarily, just on paper. No strings attached." Michelle stared at him in disbelief. This had to be some kind of joke. "You'd marry me? Just like that? We don't even know each other." Jack shrugged. "I know it sounds crazy, but I'd like to help. I don't have any family obligations, and it wouldn't have to be a real marriage, just something that helps you get the loan. Afterward, we can go our separate ways." Jessica, who had been quietly watching the exchange, leaned forward. "Wait, are you serious?" she asked. "Why would you do that for someone you just met?" Jack smiled again, this time more thoughtfully. "Let's just say, I've been where you are before. I know how hard it can be when you're out of options. Sometimes, you just need someone to give you a little boost." Michelle sat back, considering his offer. She didn't know anything about this man, but something about him seemed genuine, and she was running out of options fast. I'll think about it," she said slowly. "I just need some time." Jack nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need. If you decide to go through with it, I'm here." He stood up, giving her one last smile before leaving the coffee shop. As Michelle watched him go, her mind raced. Was this really her only option? Could she really marry a man she just met, even if it was only temporary? The next few days passed in a blur for Michelle as she weighed her options. Every time she looked at the pile of bills and the rejection letter from the bank, her thoughts went back to Jack's offer. It sounded crazy, but she had to admit, it was practical. Her best friend Jessica had been texting her nonstop about it, trying to convince her that Jack might just be her saving grace. But Michelle wasn't so sure. Could she really trust a stranger to enter into something as serious as marriage, even if it was only a formality? Finally, after a long, sleepless night of tossing and turning, Michelle made up her mind. She couldn't let her father's legacy slip away, not when there was still a chance to save the shop. The next morning, she texted Jack, asking him to meet her at the same coffee shop. When he arrived, he greeted her with the same easy smile she remembered. "So, what's the verdict?" Michelle took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. I've decided to take you up on your offer." Jack nodded, his expression understanding. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm sure," Michelle said firmly, "but I have a few conditions." "Of course," Jack said, leaning forward with interest. "Name them." "First, this is strictly a temporary arrangement. We'll stay married long enough for me to get the loan and save the shop. After that, we'll part ways. No hard feelings." "Agreed," Jack said easily. "Second, I don't want any money from you. I'll take care of my own expenses. All I need is your signature on the paperwork." "Deal." "And third, no secrets. If we're going to do this, I want to know that I can trust you." Jack hesitated for a split second before nodding. No secrets, he agreed, though the words tasted bitter in his mouth. He hated lying to her, but he couldn't bring himself to reveal the truth about who he really was. Not yet. With the conditions set, they proceeded with their plan. The next day, they went to the courthouse, signed the necessary paperwork, and just like that, Michelle and Jack were officially married. The days after the wedding were strange for Michelle. She had never imagined that she'd be married, much less to a man she barely knew. But as the weeks passed, something unexpected happened. She and Jack began to grow closer. At first, their interactions were polite but distant. Jack would show up at the shop to help with odd jobs, fixing broken shelves or assisting customers. Michelle was grateful for the help, but she kept her guard up, reminding herself that this was a temporary arrangement. But Jack's warm, down-to-earth nature made it hard to keep her distance. He was always quick with a joke, and his easygoing attitude made her laugh when she least expected it. Slowly, Michelle found herself opening up to him, sharing stories about her father and the struggles she faced trying to keep the business alive. Jack, in turn, shared bits of his own life, though he carefully avoided any mention of his CEO status. He told Michelle about his childhood, growing up in a modest home with parents who had worked hard to provide for him. He talked about how he valued simple things, like good food and meaningful conversations. As they spent more time together, their bond deepened. Michelle found herself looking forward to Jack's visits to the shop. She appreciated his company, and his presence brought a sense of stability to her otherwise chaotic life. They began to share dinners together, talking late into the night about their hopes and dreams. Michelle tried to ignore the growing feelings she had for Jack. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, nothing more. But Jack's kindness and humor were hard to resist. Jack, too, was struggling with his own emotions. The more time he spent with Michelle, the more he realized how much he cared for her. She was different from anyone he had ever met. Honest, hardworking, and completely unaware of his wealth. He loved that she treated him like an equal, without any pretenses or hidden agendas. But the longer he kept his secret, the heavier it weighed on him. He knew that one day, Michelle would find out the truth about who he really was. And when that day came, he feared it would destroy everything they had built. While Michelle believed Jack to be a simple, ordinary worker, he was leading a double life. By day, he was her helpful husband, always ready to lend a hand at the shop or share a quiet meal at home. But behind the scenes, Jack was managing Dawson Enterprises, a multimillion-dollar company that demanded most of his time and attention. He had perfected the art of balancing his two lives, thanks to the help of his assistant, Claire, who handled many of his day-to-day responsibilities at the office. Whenever Michelle asked where he went during the day, Jack would explain that he had work, and she didn't pry any further. She had no reason to suspect that her humble husband was, in fact, a wealthy businessman. But as the months passed, Jack found it harder to maintain the lie. Every time he left for the office, he felt a pang of guilt. He hated keeping Michelle in the dark, but he couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. He had fallen in love with her, and he feared that revealing his secret would ruin everything. Despite the growing tension, Jack and Michelle's relationship continued to flourish. They spent more time together, sharing quiet evenings at home, watching old movies, or cooking dinner together. Jack cherished these moments, knowing they couldn't last forever. Michelle, meanwhile, was completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. To her, Jack was the perfect partner, kind, patient, and endlessly supportive. She couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, their temporary marriage could become something more. Michelle couldn't pinpoint when it happened, but somewhere between their makeshift dinners and late-night conversations, her feelings for Jack began to evolve. What started as a business arrangement was slowly transforming into something far more personal and intimate. Jack was always there. Whether it was helping her unload stock deliveries, fixing broken equipment in the shop, or offering a kind word when she felt overwhelmed by the mountain of responsibilities that weighed her down. His quiet, steady presence became something she looked forward to each day. One evening, as they closed up the shop together, Michelle found herself watching him, studying the way his hair fell into his eyes as he bent over to fix a jammed register. His brow furrowed in concentration, and a small smile tugged at her lips. He wasn't flashy, wasn't overbearing, but there was a quiet confidence in everything he did. She found herself drawn to that, drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected. "You're staring," Jack said, without looking up, a knowing grin spreading across his face. Michelle blinked, embarrassed to be caught. "No, I'm not," she said quickly, a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. He finally looked up, chuckling softly. "Sure you're not." He finished his work and leaned back, stretching his arms with a satisfied groan. "All fixed." Michelle cleared her throat, trying to shake off the awkwardness. "Thanks, as usual. I don't know what I'd do without you." Jack's smile softened, and he gave her a look that made her heart skip a beat. "You're stronger than you think, Michelle. You'd be just fine." She didn't know how to respond to that. Jack's belief in her was unwavering, but there were times when her own doubts crept in. The shop was doing better, yes, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Yet, every time Jack was around, everything seemed manageable. The thought of him not being there anymore made her chest tighten. "You're a good man, Jack," she said softly, her voice carrying more weight than she intended. Jack's eyes flickered with something unreadable, and for a moment, there was a tension between them. A delicate, almost unspoken understanding. He reached out and touched her hand, his thumb brushing gently against her knuckles. "And you're a good woman, Michelle," he said, his voice low. "You don't give yourself enough credit." The moment lingered between them, and Michelle felt her breath hitch slightly. There was something different in the way he was looking at her, something that made her feel vulnerable and exposed. But just as quickly, Jack pulled his hand away, the moment broken. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, and slung it over his shoulder. "I'll see you tomorrow." Michelle nodded, watching him walk out the door, her mind racing. She couldn't deny it anymore. What she felt for Jack wasn't just admiration or gratitude. It was something deeper, something far more dangerous. She was falling for him. A few weeks later, their one-year wedding anniversary was approaching. Michelle had been thinking about it for days, unsure of how to mark the occasion. After all, their marriage wasn't exactly a traditional one. There had been no grand wedding, no vows exchanged with deep emotion, and certainly no honeymoon. It had been a simple, pragmatic arrangement. But now, things were different. She couldn't shake the idea that she wanted to do something special for Jack, something that would show him how much she appreciated everything he had done for her, even if she still hadn't told him how she truly felt. So, she decided to cook him a special dinner. Jack had once mentioned offhandedly that his favorite meal growing up was a classic roast chicken with rosemary potatoes, comfort food that reminded him of home. Michelle, who wasn't much of a cook, spent hours researching recipes, determined to get it just right. The day of their anniversary, she closed the shop early, rushed home, and threw herself into preparing the meal. She was a nervous wreck, but as the smell of roasted garlic and herbs filled the small apartment, she started to relax. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was heartfelt. When Jack walked in that evening, he was visibly surprised. He looked around the cozy apartment, taking in the candles flickering softly on the dining table and the delicious aroma coming from the kitchen. "What's all this?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Michelle, feeling suddenly shy, wiped her hands on a towel and smiled. "It's our anniversary, remember?" Jack blinked, as if the date had completely slipped his mind. Wow, I didn't think you'd even." "It's no big deal," she interrupted quickly, trying to play it down. "I just thought we should at least acknowledge it. After all, we've been married for a year now." Jack stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable, before he smiled. "This is really thoughtful, Michelle. Thank you." They sat down to eat, and to Michelle's immense relief, the meal was a success. Jack complimented her cooking more times than necessary, which made her laugh. But as the evening wore on, their conversation took a quieter, more personal turn. "I never thought I'd end up here," Jack said softly, leaning back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the window where the city lights twinkled in the distance. "Married, sharing dinner with someone like you." Michelle tilted her head, intrigued. "Someone like me?" Jack smiled. "You're different, Michelle. You're real. You don't put on airs, and you don't care about superficial things. It's refreshing." Michelle felt her heart skip a beat. There was something in the way he said it, something that felt deeply personal. "I guess I could say the same about you," she replied, her voice soft. "You've been nothing but kind to me, Jack. I really don't know how to thank you." Jack looked at her for a long moment, and Michelle could see the conflict in his eyes, like he wanted to say something but was holding back. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice tense. "I haven't been entirely honest with you about." Before he could finish, Michelle's phone buzzed loudly on the table, breaking the moment. She glanced at the screen. Jessica was calling. "I'm sorry, I need to take this," she said quickly, standing up and answering the call. Jack watched her go, the words he had been about to say dying on his lips. His heart sank. He couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth, not yet. The next day, Michelle was out running errands for the shop when something caught her eye. As she passed by a newsstand, a magazine headline stopped her in her tracks. "Jack Dawson, CEO of Dawson Enterprises, expands global reach." Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the glossy cover. There, in full color, was Jack. Her Jack, standing in front of a sleek corporate building, looking every bit the powerful, confident businessman. She felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. It couldn't be. There had to be some mistake. Jack had never mentioned anything about being a CEO, much less the head of a multimillion-dollar company. She grabbed the magazine and flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the article. The more she read, the more it became clear. There was no mistake. Jack had been lying to her this whole time. Her hands trembled as she closed the magazine, her mind racing. How could he have kept something like this from her? She thought they had grown close, that they trusted each other. But now, everything felt like a lie. The man she had fallen for wasn't who she thought he was. Michelle hurried home, her heart pounding in her chest. She needed answers. When Michelle got back to the apartment, Jack was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He looked up as she walked in, immediately sensing that something was wrong. "Michelle? What's going on?" he asked, standing up. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the counter, tossed the magazine onto the table, and crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes blazing with hurt and betrayal. Care to explain this? She asked, her voice trembling. Jack looked down at the magazine and immediately understood. His face paled, and he ran a hand through his hair, sighing heavily. Michelle, I can explain. You lied to me, Jack, she said, her voice rising. All this time, you've been lying. I thought you were just, I don't know, an ordinary guy trying to help me out. But you're a CEO? A millionaire? What else haven't you told me? Jack stepped forward, his expression pained. I didn't want to deceive you. I didn't want my money to come between us. I've had people use me in the past, and I didn't want that with you. Michelle shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. That's what hurts the most. You made me believe in something that wasn't real. It was real, Jack insisted, his voice breaking. Everything between us is real. I swear, Michelle, I never meant to hurt you. I love you. Michelle's breath caught at his words, but the pain in her heart was too fresh, too raw. I need time to think, she said quietly, turning away from him. Jack reached out, but she stepped back. He watched as she walked out the door, his heart sinking. He had feared this moment for so long, and now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to fix it. Michelle spent the next few days in a daze, trying to process everything she had learned. Jack wasn't just some ordinary guy who had happened into her life. He was Jack Dawson, a multimillionaire CEO with a sprawling business empire. It felt like her entire world had been turned upside down. She kept replaying every moment in her head, wondering how she had been so blind. How could she have missed all the signs? Every time she thought about Jack, a mix of emotions hit her: anger, hurt, confusion. And yet, despite it all, she missed him. She missed the way he smiled at her, the way he helped her with the shop, the way he made her feel safe and cherished. But that feeling was now tainted with betrayal. Michelle confided in Jessica, who had been her rock through this emotional storm. They sat together in the tiny cafe near her shop, sipping coffee as Michelle poured her heart out. I just don't know what to do, Michelle said, her voice breaking. He lied to me for so long. I thought we had something real. Jessica frowned sympathetically, stirring her drink. I get it. It's a massive lie. But you also said he didn't do it to hurt you. Maybe he was just scared. People do stupid things when they're scared of losing someone they care about. Michelle chewed her lip, staring out the window. I know, but he didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. How can we build something real if it's based on a lie? Jessica reached over and squeezed her hand. You need to talk to him, Michelle. Really talk to him. Decide if what you had is worth fighting for. And if it is, maybe you can find a way to move past this. Michelle nodded, knowing Jessica was right. She needed closure, one way or another. But confronting Jack again terrified her. What if things could never be the same? While Michelle wrestled with her emotions, Jack was in his own private hell. Since she walked out, every moment felt like a painful reminder of what he had lost. He hadn't been able to focus on work, had barely eaten, and spent his days replaying their last conversation in his mind. The raw look of hurt in her eyes haunted him. He had made the worst mistake of his life by keeping his true identity a secret, but it wasn't out of malice, it was out of fear. Jack had always kept his wealth hidden from people he cared about because, in the past, it had been used against him. He had seen friends, lovers, and even family turn on him when they realized how much power and money he held. With Michelle, it had been different. She saw him for who he was, not what he had. That's why he had fallen for her so deeply. But now, that very love had been tainted by his lies. Claire, his assistant, noticed how distracted he was and confronted him one afternoon in his office. Jack, you need to go to her, she said firmly. You can't just let this fester. If you care about her, you'll fight for her. I don't know if she'll even listen to me, Jack said, rubbing his temples. She's hurt, and I don't blame her. I ruined everything. Claire crossed her arms and stared him down. You didn't ruin everything. You made a mistake. People make mistakes. What matters is what you do now. Go to her, Jack. Be honest this time. Jack nodded slowly, knowing she was right. He had to see Michelle, to tell her everything, no more secrets. Whether she forgave him or not, he needed to lay it all out on the table. A few days later, Jack decided to go to the shop. Michelle had been avoiding him, and he couldn't bear it anymore. He waited until the evening, hoping to catch her when she was closing up. His heart pounded as he made his way down the familiar street, the sight of the shop triggering so many memories, both good and painful. When he arrived, Michelle was alone, stacking shelves and wiping down the counter. She froze when she saw him, the atmosphere immediately thick with tension. "Jack," she said quietly, her eyes guarded. "Michelle, please," Jack began, his voice soft but urgent. "I know I hurt you. I know I kept things from you, but I need you to understand why." She crossed her arms over her chest, keeping her distance. "I just don't understand how you could lie to me for so long. If you loved me like you said you did, why didn't you trust me?" Jack took a step closer, his expression earnest. "Because I've been hurt before, Michelle. People have used me, my money, my power. They've taken advantage of me. I didn't want that with you. You're different. You saw me for who I was, not for what I had. I was scared that if you knew the truth, everything would change." Michelle's heart clenched at his words, but she still couldn't shake the betrayal. "But it did change, Jack. The minute I found out, everything changed. You didn't give me the chance to prove that I wasn't like everyone else." "I know," Jack said, his voice breaking, "and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for not trusting you, for keeping you in the dark. But I swear, everything I felt for you, everything I still feel, is real. I love you, Michelle. I never lied about that." Tears filled Michelle's eyes as she looked at him, her heart torn between the love she still felt and the hurt that lingered. "I just don't know if I can forgive you, Jack. Not right now." Jack nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand, but please, just know that I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to forgive me." With that, Jack turned and walked out, leaving Michelle standing alone in the shop, her heart aching with the weight of the decision she had to make. The days that followed were agonizing for Michelle. She couldn't stop thinking about Jack, about everything they had been through, the lies he had told, and the love they had shared. She knew he had been scared, and she understood why he had kept his secret, but that didn't erase the pain. At night, she found herself replaying all the moments they had shared, the quiet dinners, the laughter, the way he had always been there for her when she needed him. Jack wasn't just the CEO of some big company. He was the man who had supported her, believed in her, and made her feel like she could take on the world. One evening, as she sat in the apartment, staring at the city lights outside her window, Michelle made a decision. She couldn't deny the love she still felt for Jack. Despite the lies, despite the betrayal, she couldn't imagine her life without him. But she also knew that if they were going to make this work, everything had to be different. There could be no more secrets, no more lies. The next day, she found herself outside Jack's office building, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen this side of his world before, and it felt intimidating. But this wasn't about his money or his status, it was about them. Taking a deep breath, she walked inside and made her way to his office. Claire smiled warmly at her and led her straight to Jack's door. When Jack saw her standing in the doorway, his eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, he looked like he didn't dare believe she was there. "Michelle?" She stepped into the room, her voice steady but soft. "We need to talk." Jack nodded, standing up from his desk. "Of course, whatever you need to say." Michelle held up her hand, cutting him off. "I'm not here to accuse you anymore, Jack. I've had time to think, and I realize that, despite everything, I can't let go of what we have. I still love you, but if we're going to move forward, things have to change. No more secrets, no more lies." Jack's face softened with relief and hope. He crossed the room to stand in front of her, his eyes filled with emotion. "I swear to you, Michelle, no more secrets, no more lies. I'll never hurt you like that again." Michelle nodded, feeling a weight lift off her chest. "Then let's start over. For real this time." Jack reached out, gently taking her hands in his. For real this time, he echoed, his voice filled with promise. As they stood there, hands entwined, the tension and pain of the past weeks began to fade. They still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, Michelle felt hopeful. They had faced their greatest challenge, and now, together, they could build something real. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.